FIFA called this the most inclusive World Cup in history. The most inclusive. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Gianni Infantino, repeated in press conferences from Mexico City to New York to Zurich. The most inclusive World Cup in history. Now look at what is actually happening. Empty seats. Whole rows of them. In some stadiums, whole sections. Reuters has photos. The BBC has photos. Yahoo Sports ran a piece this week showing wide angles of half-filled arenas during what was supposed to be the opening showcase of the largest tournament in football history. That is the gap. That is the entire story. The distance between what FIFA promised and what FIFA delivered is now measurable in empty plastic chairs. Let me walk you through how big that gap really is, because the numbers are worse than the headlines have admitted. FIFA used a dynamic pricing model for this tournament. Dynamic pricing, in plain English, means the price moves up and down based on demand. The same seat that costs $140 on a Tuesday can cost $300 on a Thursday. A Category 1 ticket to the final, according to reporting in The Athletic and ESPN, climbed to roughly $10,990 at one point. The proposed face value range for group stage games was $21 to $300 and $23 before suites. By the time real fans tried to buy real seats, those numbers had moved sharply upward. Think about what that means for an ordinary supporter. A family of 4 wants to attend a group stage match. They look online. They see a price. They go to make coffee. They come back. The price has changed. They refresh. It has changed again. They finally click buy, and the total is more than a mortgage payment. Then they read the news the next morning and see that FIFA has, quote, slashed prices to $60 for Federation supporters because the seats did not sell. That is the gap. That is the entire complaint in one sentence. The fans who could not afford the early prices watched, online, as FIFA gave away the late prices to fill the rows. They paid nothing. The early buyers paid everything. And the stadium, on game day, was still half empty. Here is where it gets interesting. The BBC published a long piece this month asking whether the biggest World Cup ever could end up with the most visible empty seats in modern football history. They walked through the math. They walked through the supply. They walked through the simple fact that FIFA expanded this tournament to 48 teams and 104 matches, which means more games, more seats, and more risk that demand cannot match the inventory. The Independent published its own piece, listing what they called everything wrong with the 2026 World Cup. They pointed at unprecedented ticket prices. They pointed at Infantino. They pointed at the host nation. They published it before the tournament started. Most of what they predicted has already happened. Now, to be fair, let me give you the strongest version of FIFA's argument. They will tell you that ticket demand was overwhelming on paper. They will tell you they received more than 500 million ticket requests for fewer than 7 million available seats. That is the public number repeated by FIFA itself. They will tell you the empty rows are a logistical quirk, not a real demand failure. They will tell you many of those seats belong to sponsors, federations, and corporate partners who simply did not show up on a Tuesday afternoon. That is the Steelman. State it honestly. Now here's the counter. If demand was that overwhelming, the seats would not be empty. You cannot have 500 million requests in a half-empty arena in the same week. Either the requests were inflated, or the pricing model strangled the conversion, or the corporate allocations were too large to be filled by humans who actually wanted to watch football. Pick one, or pick all three. But you cannot keep both the demand number and the empty seat photo on the same wall. The math does not work. And here is the part that makes it worse. Local fans in many host cities are the ones missing from those rows. Reporting from ESPN this month walked through what they called the ugly cost of the beautiful game's grand event. The piece broke down city by city how far the published face value range of $21 to $323 for group stage games drifted upward once dynamic pricing took hold. Families in Dallas, families in Kansas City, families in Guadalajara. The local audience, the one that FIFA promised would be the heart of the tournament, was the first to be priced out. Think about what that means for the atmosphere inside the stadium. A World Cup match is not just 22 players on a field. It is the energy of the crowd around them. A local fan brings a kind of noise that a corporate guest cannot replicate. A child in a national team shirt screams for a goal in a way that a sponsor in the hospitality box does not. When you push the local audience out and replace them with seats that may or may not get filled by corporate partners, you change the sound of the match before the first whistle blows. Broadcasters can edit the highlights. They cannot edit the silence. Let me give you one more figure, because it lands differently than the others. FIFA is on track to earn around $871 million in expanded revenue from this tournament compared to past cycles, according to multiple business reporting outlets, including Fortune. That is nearly double the $440 million reported from Qatar. $871 million. Picture that number on a single check. Now picture the row of empty blue plastic seats behind a corner flag in a group stage game. Same tournament. Same week. Two stories that should not be true at the same time. That is the gap. Think about what that means for the next 4 weeks. This is not a small staging problem. This is not a glitch. This is a pricing philosophy, meeting a sport that depends on the noise of full stadiums. Football, more than almost any other sport, is shaped by what you hear. The roar before a corner, the wave of sound before a penalty, the silence that falls when a striker stands over the ball. Empty seats do not produce silence. They produce visual evidence, every minute of every broadcast, that the people FIFA claims to serve cannot afford to be there. That visual evidence travels. A goal scored in front of a half-empty stand looks like a goal scored at a midweek friendly. A celebration in front of a wall of unsold tickets looks like a moment that should have been bigger. The broadcasters can crop the shots. They cannot crop the reaction online. Reddit threads on the soccer subreddit have already started compiling clips. Twitter accounts dedicated to the sport are already posting comparisons to past tournaments. Here is a moment that makes it real. A reporter walked through a host city stadium on the day of a group game and counted. Section by section, row by row, tens of thousands of seats that were not sold to fans, not sold to corporates, not even given away to school children as a last resort. Just empty. In some sections, more empty seats than full ones. Think about what that tells the world about how much this World Cup actually means to the people who live in the host cities. FIFA's defenders will say this is an early tournament problem. Group stage games are always lower demand. The knockout rounds will sell out. The final will be packed. That is true historically, and it may be true this year. But here is the part that no one wants to say out loud. The group stage is the part of the tournament that defines what the World Cup looks like to the world. The group stage is where most of the matches are played. The group stage is where the new teams, the small federations, the underdog stories get their only chance on the global stage. If the group stage looks empty, the tournament looks empty. The final can be sold out, and the memory of the month can still be one of empty rows. That is the gap. There is a smaller fact that explains a lot of the bigger picture. FIFA, after the early sales backlash, slashed the price of some World Cup tickets to as low as $60 for federation supporter groups. $60. That number was widely reported, including in Reddit threads on the soccer forum that gathered tens of thousands of comments. The same seats that had been priced in the hundreds were suddenly being released at a fraction of the cost to fill the rows. Anyone who had bought early at the higher price saw that and felt cheated. Anyone who had been waiting saw that and felt mocked. Anyone watching from outside saw a governing body that did not know what its own product was worth. That is not a pricing strategy. That is a panic. And here is where the contrast with the past becomes painful. In 1994, when the United States last hosted, the average attendance was almost 69,000 per match. Almost 69,000. That was the record. Stadiums were full from the first whistle of the first game to the final whistle of the final. FIFA promoted that average in marketing materials for years afterward. This time, with bigger stadiums, more games, and a 48-team format, FIFA was expected to break that record. They were on pace, on paper, to set new attendance numbers. The pricing model was supposed to maximize per-seat revenue without sacrificing fill rate. The dynamic pricing was sold as a clever optimization. The corporate allocations were sold as a guarantee of full houses. None of it is holding up. Yahoo Sports ran a piece this month with the headline that 2026 World Cup faces empty seats, and noting it is not a new problem. The article walked through previous tournaments where local fans were priced out by the organization. The pattern keeps repeating because the pricing keeps repeating. What changes is the visibility. In 1994, the broadcast cameras were not what they are now. There were no phones in every pocket. There was no social network ready to post a panoramic shot of unsold rows within 30 seconds of kickoff. In 2026, every empty seat is a small advertisement against the tournament hosting it. The most inclusive World Cup in history. Say it again. The most inclusive World Cup in history. The phrase keeps getting smaller every time it meets a photograph of unsold inventory in a host city arena on a weeknight in June. So, what does the gap tell us about the future of the sport? It tells us that FIFA's model, the model that worked in Qatar with smaller stadiums and corporate buyouts and a tight footprint, does not transfer cleanly to a continent-sized tournament across 3 countries with 16 host cities and dramatically different local economies. It tells us that dynamic pricing in football is going to require a public reckoning before the 2030 cycle begins. It tells us that supporters in places like Kansas City and Guadalajara and Toronto are watching this play out and will remember the next time they are asked to invest emotionally in a tournament whose tickets they could never have afforded. Most of all, it tells us that the most inclusive World Cup in history is going to be remembered, fairly or not, for who was not in the stadium. What do you think? Was FIFA's dynamic pricing model the right financial decision even if it produced these visuals, or did it cost them something they cannot earn back? I read everyone, so let me know your view. If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you would think. Subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football coverage. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It is a moment in time.